Perhaps the most important factor in knife safety is how you hold your knife. So if you're using an 8-inch chef's knife, which this is the knife I recommend that you use for 90% of chopping jobs, it's actually not that different from holding any other knife. And I've seen people hold their knives in so many different ways. I've seen people hold their knives like this. It's like the serial killer style. I've seen people hold their knives like this. Actually, this is more of an Asian style of chopping. Like I've seen like sushi chefs and chefs in Chinese restaurants like hold their knife like this, but they actually have a totally different style of chopping we're not going to be learning in this training. And so what we're going to be doing is holding our knives in a way that gives you the most control in a Western style of chopping. And it's by holding your knife like this, right? So you got the hilt or the handle of your knife in your palm, so you can see right here where it is, and then you take these two fingers, your forefinger and your thumb, and you wrap them around the knife like this. And you can see I've got the thumb on one side and my forefinger knuckle right here. And the plus side of chopping and holding the knife this way is there is nowhere that this knife is going to go that I'm not in complete control. If you hold your knife like this, you can do this without even really thinking about it, right? Like I feel like I'm going to stab myself in the face right now. And it's because when you hold a knife like this, like your hand, like you have active rotation of your wrist, right? If you hold your knife like this, you actually have really good control. But the problem is you're not delivering the same amount of power in the style of chopping that we're going to be learning. So if you hold your knife like this, like it's actually a lot harder to like flail with this knife, right? Like, I mean, if I try really hard, I can flail with it. But holding your knife like this gives you a really good combination of more power and more control, so you always know where this knife is and you're always delivering maximum impact on whatever you chop. The second most important part of learning to chop is what to do with your other hand, right? Because if your knife is holding, or if your hand is holding this knife, this is not the hand you're going to cut, right? Because it's busy. You're going to cut this hand. And if you're left-handed, it's going to be the other way around. The hand holding the knife is never the one that gets cut. It's always your free hand. Unless you are like crazy, like acrobatic that I don't know about, I think you'd have a really hard time cutting your knife hand with the whole knife that you're holding. But anyway, so this is where the claw comes into play. And I'm going to warn you, the claw feels really awkward. And every single time I teach this to somebody, I get a complaint. I don't like how it feels. It feels really weird. It's uncomfortable. Well, I'll tell you what's more uncomfortable, cutting your freaking finger off, okay? I don't want to hear the complaint. And I don't want to be like all mean and rude, but I gotta tell you, like I have seen so many people cut the tip of their finger off that I have no more sympathy for how weird it feels to like use the claw. And the reality is that if you do this often enough, it becomes second nature, right? Like when I was working in restaurants, it felt weird for like a day. And after like 7 or 8 times of using the claw, it actually became second nature and it feels great. In fact, now I pick up a carrot and my hand automatically goes into the claw. Like I don't even think about it. It feels so natural. And it's because I did it consistently. So don't complain about how weird this feels. Just do it and save your fingers. And I'm going to show you why. If you're cutting with a knife and you're holding your vegetable like that, what happens is the knife rests against your knuckles, just like that. And there's nowhere to cut, right? The only way you can cut is going down. If you're holding your vegetable like this, no, like it's just a matter of time. How many times have you like either cut yourself or seen somebody else cut themselves because they're like chop, chop, oh, and they like shave off their fingernail or like the whole tip of their finger. If you keep your hand in a claw like this, you're gonna have a much tougher time cutting your fingers. So here, I'm gonna show you how this works. So you've got your knife, holding it like this for maximum control, maximum power, and you've got your hand holding the carrot like this in the claw. And we're going to touch the knife to your knuckles, and then you're just gonna push down, chop. And this came nowhere near my fingertips. And this is also really important to know because if you're chopping your vegetable in different sizes, so say you want to do 1/8 of an inch chops, you know that you just need to move your fingers back 1/8 of an inch at a time, and it actually becomes your sizing guide, which is really handy. And this is how chefs learn to chop things in perfect precision very quickly because they're using their hand as a guide and they're no longer like relying on eyesight to figure out how big the pieces are that they're chopping. So we're gonna do a couple more slices just so you can see what this looks like. Move that carrot over there. Got our knife, holding it super solid. Got our claw on the carrot, and we're gonna chop. Chop, chop, chop. Whoop, lost one. chop. And you see how like every time I took a chop, my hand moved back a little bit? And like these carrots, they're all the same size. Like how awesome is that? Look at that. All the same size. I didn't have to think about how big they were gonna be. If they were all gonna be the right size, I didn't have to worry about my fingers getting cut off. I knew my hand was safe. Everything was great. This is the best way to chop in the Western style, and I highly recommend you practice doing this every day, using the claw and using your knife and holding it properly, and I promise within like 2 or 3 days, it will feel totally natural. There's one more really important fact that I need to point out about knife safety, and it's where your knife is. So if your knife is in your hand, it needs to be chopping. And if it's not in your hand, it needs to be safely on the cutting board in view of everybody in the room. So I'm gonna show you what happens if you like keep this in your hand when you're not chopping. So say you like chop your carrot, you make another chop, and then somebody comes up and asks me how my day went. I'm like, oh, it went really well. Like this guy totally cut me off in traffic and blah, 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 blah. What is happening to this knife right now, right? It's waving around. And whoever is like deciding that this is a good time to walk behind me is like serial killered, okay? Not great. So if this knife is not actively chopping in your hand, it needs to be on the board. Like if you're not chopping, the knife should not be in your hand, because if it's not chopping, this knife is somewhere. And if you're not paying attention to what it's doing, then you're not paying attention to the knife. And that's just like a recipe for disaster, right? You're gonna cut yourself, you're gonna cut somebody else, you're gonna like point at the fridge and like somebody's gonna be standing right there. And then, I mean, why would you want to do that to somebody, you know? And like knife safety, perhaps the biggest, most important factor in knife safety is just knowing where your knife is, right? So your knife always needs to be in a place where you know where it is and that it's safe, right? So, you know, don't put it in the sink where it might be obscured by other things. Don't put it here and then set your cutting board on top of it. Don't like put it over here and throw like a paper towel on top of it or a towel. Like you always need to know where your knife is. It always needs to be visible so that the people around you can safely avoid it. If your knife is not visible, it stands a really good chance of cutting someone.